One of the many things that I found really interesting about becoming an adult is that a lot of the things that we're taught as children, particularly in school, are false. A lot of things are taken for granted, that you're just basically told this is black and white and you don't want to be on the wrong side of the black and white argument. Well, part of that is that a lot of the things that you may think are weaknesses, especially in those educational institutions, those end up being strengths. And our guest today shares my skepticism about the institution of typical schooling, mostly driven by the fact that he, quote, suffers from a lot of the challenges that people with high levels of ADD, quote, suffer with. But our guest has figured out a way to turn what most people would call his weaknesses into his strengths in some really radical ways. And that is what we're going to talk about today. So in this discussion, we're going to discuss what is the deal with multitasking. Is this something that can be done effectively, or is trying to do multiple things basically at the same time a fool's errand? How does our guest accomplish remarkable things in an incredibly short amount of time? What systems, what workflow is he creating to ensure that his ADD actually enriches his ability to get things done as opposed to inhibits it? And how did our guest finish writing an entire book in just a matter of a few hours? Yes, you heard me correctly. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around because it's pretty remarkable. And guess what? This is it. Right now, this is the last time I'm going to mention IREC 2020. Why? Because it is this weekend. Hopefully, this podcast is being launched on time, January 25th through 26th, downtown Los Angeles. The absolute all-stars are going to be there. And I've mentioned this before. Most of the time when you go to real estate conferences, you see that the very experienced speakers and the sponsors are all generally hanging out in the networking area because they're not really getting much out of the content. That is not the case with this conference. And the reason for that is that we bring in ultra high level people who are competitors and they want to learn from each other. They want to see what their perspective is. What lenders are they working with? What rates are they getting? Where are they getting their investors? What technological solutions are they using? These are the types of questions that some of the best in the business are going to be answering. So you'll find me plopped down in the middle of those sessions, learning from the best of the best. We've curated a list of incredibly talented real estate authors, economists, speakers, people that are really impacting the business in a positive way. And they're going to give away all their secrets for free. That's the whole point with the conference. We get people who are not afraid to share their secrets. If you read my book about raising capital, you know what side of that argument I'm on. So I hope to see you there. If you haven't yet gotten your tickets, make sure to do so. We are going to turn off registration very, very soon. If it's not already off, you can go to intelligentinvestors2020.com. And yes, you can use a discount code, which is ASYM. It'll get you $100 off. I will see you there. I just saw the menu. The food is going to be amazing, which is usually what people care most about at these real estate conferences. Trust me, the food's going to be awesome. I'll see you at the Intelligent Investors Real Estate Conference in downtown LA. How's it going, everyone? Our guest for today is Peter Shankman, who is a spectacular example of what happens when you merge the power of pure creativity with ADHD, as well as a dose of adventure. An author, entrepreneur, and corporate keynote speaker, Peter is recognized worldwide for radically new ways about thinking about customer service, social media, PR, marketing, advertising, and ADHD. Peter is best known for founding Help a Reporter Out, or HARO, which in under a year became the de facto standard for thousands of journalists looking for sources on a deadline. I've used this, we'll talk about it many, many times in this content. HARO is currently the largest free source repository in the world, and it sends out 1,500 queries from worldwide media each week. In June of 2010, less than 2 years after Peter started HARO, in his apartment, it was acquired. He sold it to Vocus Inc. So, Peter, obviously, we're going to cover a really fascinating topic, something that you've put a lot of effort into. But before we even get into that, thanks again for coming on the program.
Yeah, happy to do it. Glad to be here.
So, the topic of ADHD is something that is becoming more and more popular. I feel like it went on a surge, and now there's becoming a little bit of a pushback with that surge of all the medication and stuff like that. Before we even get into that angle, when did you start to realize that, number one, that you had a component of ADHD in your personality, and then later when you realized that it was a little bit of a blessing? Kind of walk us through that transition.
Yeah, I mean, I always knew I was different. Growing up, though, ADHD didn't exist when I was a kid in the 80s and 70s. It was sit down, you're disrupting the class disease. And so for me, I wasn't, I never really knew that I had something wrong with me per se. I don't look at it like that. But I also knew I was different. And that caused a lot of grief growing up because, in school, I think the motto of, especially in like junior high or whatever, is, school, where if you're different, that's wrong. And, I was definitely different. And so that caused some grief and didn't make junior high or part of high school that much fun. But as I get out of college and then after my first job, I worked at America Online. It was my first job. And it was great because they let us do whatever we wanted. I helped found the newsroom at AOL and it was incredible. Just an amazing time. But I left AOL and moved back to New York. And all of a sudden, my second job, I had to be in at 8:30 in the morning and I had to punch in and I had a meeting every morning at 9. And I'm like, what is this, Russia? This is horrible, And I quit after 2 weeks and I realized that I don't play well with others. And that's when I went out on my own. And that's when I realized that if I know how to work this thing I have, which later became known as ADHD, apparently this thing I have is very useful because it does allow me to do a lot of good stuff, but I have to learn how to manage it. And, again, just over time, doing my own thing and whatever, here we are. And like I said, very, very fortunate. And I very much wanted to explain to the rest of the world, especially those with ADHD who think they might be cursed or whatever, that it's a gift. If you know how to use it, it's definitely a gift. You just have to understand it. And so it's that's sort of what I'm dedicating a lot of my time to now, among other things. I have a great podcast called Faster Than Normal, which talks all about ADHD with looking at it as a gift. We've had Tony Robbins, Seth Godin, Danny Meyer, Keith Crouch from DocuSign, David Engelman from JetBlue, Joe DeSena from Spartan Race, all on the podcast, all who have ADHD and all who say that, hey, this is why I'm as successful as I am. And so that's always awesome. And then, other things that I've written a book called Faster Than Normal. I have 5 books, 4 business books, one's ADHD, and it's really making a difference. So it's, like I said, I'm very lucky and I'm having a great time.
That's awesome to hear. I think, one of the first things you touched on was the schools. This is something that it is remarkable. I mean, the reason that children in school have summers off is usually because of, historically is because of like the whole agricultural movement. And
right, they work in the parks.
Exactly, which is just insane. It shows you that we're basically on operating system Stone Age in the school system.
Right, and 200 years ago, and there's no question about it. And, studies have proven that out countless times. In certain school districts, professors have come in from the university and they've tripled the recess time. And they're seeing a 54% decrease in ADHD outbursts, a 34% increase in girls getting involved in the class. All these things that, everyone's like, why don't we have this? Well, maybe because, the kid wakes up at 7 a.m, downs 2 bowls of chocolate frosted sugar bombs and sits in front of the TV before going to school where you expect them to sit and pay attention for 8 hours, as opposed to, maybe getting up early, giving them some protein and letting them run around for an hour to naturally build up the dopamine, the serotonin that they need to focus. But, we just don't think like that. And so instead we put them on Adderall and Ritalin, and we're putting kids as young as 5 years old on essentially stimulants to make them act more like 55-year-old men, when maybe they're not ADHD, but maybe they're just, 5. So it's something totally. I'm trying to focus on changing.
For sure. And they're in an environment that's not stimulating to a 5-year-old. I mean, not only is it not stimulating to a 5-year-old, we're having a massive challenge in the school system because people are graduating after 12 years or sometimes more with very little skills that are brought into the marketplace that are compelling. When in reality, if I were going to teach a school right now, I mean, my business would be how to be what, some people refer to as a youpreneur, just how to build a website, how to build a brand, how to drive traffic to that website, how to get leads, and then how to nurture those leads, and then how to close deals. Yeah. That's not at all talked about in school. That's basically what the entirety of running a business is at this point. So anyway, I have this kind of mentality about that as well. And one of the things, and kind of a tie-in there is, you mentioned Seth Godin, by the way. In that interview or in a discussion you had with him, you mentioned kind of the difference between hunters and farmers. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that because I think it actually applies well to this conversation about schools as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the concept: are you going out and are you constantly moving? Are you doing, or agriculture didn't exist until a couple hundred years ago, or 1,100 years ago. And so prior to that, we would spend all our time running around. Once we caught something, then we'd sit for a while, but then we'd go out and run around and catch something else again, right? And with agriculture came the concept of time and time-based, and we'll do this today, and then tonight we'll sit, and then tomorrow, and so our brains haven't really adapted to this sort of new world. We're still in the hunter phase. And to combat that, we have a problem in that regard. And Seth said something very interesting. He said, for people with ADHD, or maybe entrepreneurs and things like that in general, forward motion is thrilling. And because we love forward motion so much, when you don't have forward motion, even if you're not really going backwards, but just think you are, even if you're just standing still, you feel like you're going backwards. So it has to be forward motion. And when we don't have it, it's horrible.
Right. You feel like you need to be constantly moving forward, which is great to have as an entrepreneur because that is the reality of the situation. If you're not moving forward, you're probably moving backward. And I actually like the comment about agriculture. We haven't evolved past that hunter type of mentality. At least some of us haven't. But I will say that it's also interesting that a big part of my worldview is based on the fact that in the year 1800, about 83% of the entire US workforce was in agriculture. Mm-hmm. So it went from zero agriculture, because it didn't exist, to now more than 80% of the entire workforce is in agriculture. And here's the thing that I find interesting about this, and my listeners have heard me talk about this before, but I just cannot stress this enough for those of you that are just getting into the world right now in terms of employment. If I was born back then, people would just think I wasn't a good worker. I mean, there's so few jobs that people would think that I was just not a productive member of society because I don't make for a good agriculture worker. I don't make for a good farmer. I wouldn't find that very compelling because of this, that ADHD or whatever that is.
I'll take it a step further. Not only that,
yeah, sure.
But you'd be classified, there are, and that's what I always, that's what I love when I get the cynics who go, ADHD doesn't exist. It didn't exist 50 years ago. Well, neither did penicillin, bitch. Instead, we burn people at the stake. Would you prefer to go back to that? Just because something didn't exist 50 years ago doesn't mean it's not very, very real right now.
Right. 100%. Yes, that's a great example. And that may have been where I ended up, or just, that guy just doesn't like to work because, I don't like doing handiwork. It doesn't mean I'm not a productive member of society. It's a great time to be alive. There's a lot of different employment options. Okay. So we've clearly outlined, the situation with ADHD, especially relates to schools, but I want to get into kind of how you were able to focus that energy in the sense of what are some of the steps that you took to harness that and turn it into a massive benefit, similar to the Tony Robbins of the world, similar to the Seth Godins that you mentioned. What does that routine look like?
A lot for me involves structure, which is ironic because, ADHD, we're not into structure, but there are certain things that simply have to happen or I don't have a good day. It's mandatory that I exercise every morning, right? So I'm up. I try to go to bed super early, and I'm up most days by 4 a.m., if not earlier. I get on my Peloton bike or I go out for a run or whatever immediately, like literally immediately. I have to do it. If I don't the second I get up, if I don't work out, I'm in a lot of trouble. I won't have a good day.
Okay.
And so that has to happen, right? And, sometimes I'm exhausted because I haven't gotten enough sleep, but most times, if you're like, oh my God, you go to bed at your daughter goes to sleep at 8 o'clock and you're asleep by 8:30 and you're up at 3:45. What are you, a farmer? I'm like, hey, you know what? It works for me. So exercise is mandatory. I try to, as much as possible, eliminate choice. What do I mean by that? I have two sides to my closet. They are labeled. One side says speaking/TV, and it's filled with button-down shirts, jackets, and jeans. The other side says office/travel, and it's filled with t-shirts and jeans. And that's it. My suits, my, gorgeous three-piece, whatever, high holiday suits, my, tassel shoes, whatever, my sweaters, they're all in another closet, in another room entirely because I had to wake up every morning and say, okay, what should I wear? Oh, this sweater. Oh my God, I remember this sweater. Laura gave me that sweater. I wonder how she's doing. I should look at it's 3 hours later. I'm naked in the living room on Facebook and I haven't left the house. and it is very easy to go down this rabbit hole. And so I make every effort to avoid those rabbit holes. Same reason when I do work out every morning, I go to sleep and put on my gym clothes before I go to bed. I fall asleep in a pair of biking shorts and socks. I wake up, I walk 6 inches to my left, I sit on my bike. It is impossible not to do that. But if I had to, do I have any clean, wear the shorts? You know what? Screw it. I'm just going to go back to sleep. So you try to avoid as much as possible.
I actually like that. Let me just cut in real quick because decision fatigue is something that is well documented, not only for people with ADHD, but just generally. There's a lot of scientific data that suggests that any time that you have to use any willpower whatsoever, it's like a depleting asset that you run out of during the day, especially before you sleep. So if you can Google this, just decision fatigue TED Talk, you'll find about people that are, if they're constantly put in a position of using that critical thinking when they don't need to, your perfect example of what to wear, for example, you can really optimize your brain power. It's really going to help you work another 2 hours a day optimally in terms like cognitively demanding tasks. So I just wanted to mention that because I'm a big proponent of that as well.
Yep, it's very true. And for me, it really is about making sure that I'm doing the right thing, that I am focused on moving forward, however small that might be, and asking myself, is what I'm doing right now or tomorrow or the next day or yesterday, is that helping me move forward? Is that helping me get to my goal of where I want to be? And if it's not, well, how do I fix that? Right? How do I get back to that place? Because I need to be there. And, having that sort of goal or that thought or whatever allows me to, I'm not perfect. God knows I'm not perfect. I screw up. But how do I do it in such a way that it works? And it really is about just trying my best and making sure that I can do it right, and life goes on. And it's not, I don't get it done every day, but I try my best.
So you mentioned kind of the constant feeling of moving forward that entrepreneurs need and people with ADHD need as well. What other components do you think are either helpful or potentially painful for entrepreneurs that have ADHD?
I think one of the things that's painful is not having a plan, going into your day and saying, okay, well, let's see what we can get done today. That never works. You have to have a plan. Like for me, my assistant only schedules meetings on one day a week, like out of the office meetings on one day a week. Another time, I always have, all my writing is on airplanes. I won't write anywhere but airplanes because for me, that's where I get into deep work. That's where I get into what I call my zone of focus, where I know where I'm going to be. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm working. And so I do that. It's about making sure that I'm doing the right thing in the right place, doing the right whatever. And so you have these rules. And as long as you set these rules up, you're doing okay.
One of the things that my brain wants to do when I think of multitasking, it's kind of like an ADHD type of feeling of behavior in the sense that, oh my gosh, I can do 4 things at the same time. That's 4 times faster than anyone else is working. I can get everything done. This is especially true, by the way, when I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing.
Exactly.
So if there's a task that I have outsourced that someone else should be handling, and I'm like, oh, I can just bang out a couple of responses to this and that and the other thing, or anything that I know I shouldn't be doing, I'm like, oh, just blitz it for 15 minutes. I'll get it done. What are your thoughts on multitasking? Is that part of your structure, or have you completely or tried to eliminate that from your workflow?
Look, everyone's going to have a rabbit hole every once in a while. Ooh, cat video, and
yeah.
And so for me, and I understand that I'm going to do that. I try not to beat myself up by it, but I also try to make sure that I'm in a place where it doesn't happen that often. I limit the amount of exposure I can get to do those things. When I'm on the plane, I have a program called OmWriter, which is a word processing program that opens this blank document, shuts off all outside reminders, shuts off Wi-Fi, shuts off Bluetooth, shuts off everything. No posts, no announcements, no pop-ups until you quit the program. So, I have my headphones on, I'm looking at the screen, I'm just working. And so,
what's the name of that one more time? I just want to make sure we got that on there.
It's for Mac. I'm sure there's other versions of PC, but it's called OmWriter, OMM Writer.
Great.
I think it's like $7, like the best $7 you'll spend.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said you want to keep doing things that you create your personal way of getting past those things, right? And not allowing them to, get in your head. I mean, I know if I get on Facebook or Reddit or whatever, that, that's gonna be 6 hours. So I try to avoid doing that.
Makes sense. And I think that one of the things that I just can tell by interacting, I did interact with your assistant in scheduling this call, and I can tell that she's extremely locked in. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the entrepreneur and the relationship with the assistant and how important that is, some of the things that you've put in place, some of the systems that you've created or the communications that you've created to really optimize that relationship. Because I think any entrepreneur, their assistant is like truly their right-hand person, but especially if you have that ADHD where you're trying to go in a billion directions at the same time.
Well, it's funny. So I've had Megan for about 11 years, and she runs my life. She's wonderful. But the amazing joke about this is that she took away right access to my calendar probably about 10 years ago. I went to put something in my calendar on Google, and it said, you do not have permission to do this. I'm like, what the hell? Like, Megan, something's wrong. She's like, no, everything's perfect. She's like, you want to do something? You tell me what it is, and I'll book it for you. I'm like, what's wrong with you? You work for me. She's like, yeah, and you booked 2 dinners for this Friday night. Are you aware of that at the same time? I'm like, oh, come on, that's not such a big deal. She's like, Peter, you booked them on separate continents. And I'm like, oh.
I don't think you're going to make it.
Right, you might have a point. So that being said, Megan controls my calendar. I have accepted that there are things I'm friggin' awesome at, and there are things I suck at. And the things I suck at, I outsource. It's that simple.
I like hearing that, obviously. So you wrote a book called Faster Than Normal, which obviously a tremendous amount of momentum. It's been out. There's many, many positive reviews on Amazon. And I am a huge proponent of productivity. I feel like even if something can get you an additional 5 minutes of cognitively demanding tasks each day, that as you continue your life as an entrepreneur, those 15 minutes become more and more valuable. And the time is, this is what you always read about when you're starting, which is every successful entrepreneur is always talking about time. When you're getting started, you're like, dude, I got plenty of time. Just need to fill that time up. Now, later in your career, you start to be like, man, 10 minutes would be amazing. So what are some of those productivity hacks that you talk about in the book, Faster Than Normal, especially as it relates to entrepreneurship or just general workflow?
Well, a lot of it is, again, outsource everything that you're not good at, and understand that just because you're not good at something doesn't mean you're a failure as a person, right? Be very aware of how you run your life in terms of outside of work. So for instance, I stopped drinking several years ago, and with the exception of, a few missteps over the last few years, I haven't drank. And the reason for that is because when you're ADHD, when you're an entrepreneur, you tend to do things very, very fast all the time. It's not just about, working fast, it's doing everything fast. And so I'll be at an event with a open bar and I'll have a drink and I'll drink it really fucking fast, right? The same way I drink water really fast, the same way I eat pizza really fast. And you have to learn that some things done really fast are not good for you, because I'll have one drink and it'll be 6 drinks later. And I'm not trying to get drunk, but I am, it's just the same. I have a joke that people without my kind of brain, normal people, have, they get hungry one night on their way home from work and they don't feel like cooking, so they order a pizza. And they bring the pizza home and they have 2 slices and they put the rest of it in the fridge for tomorrow. That's called leftover pizza.
Right.
So I've never had that in my life. That's not a real thing.
Okay.
Right? I order a pizza, I eat the pizza, enjoy it for about 15 minutes, and then spend the next 2 hours hating myself. That's just what I do. So the question becomes, what can you do to prevent that? So I don't keep alcohol in the house, right? I don't drink. It's just easier to say no to that first drink. There was a great movie that came out in the 80s called War Games with Matthew Broderick. And he had the computer that controlled the nuclear codes not to start a war. And the last line of the movie where the computer finally figures it out is, interesting game, the only winning move is not to play. And I've learned that the only winning move for me is simply not to play. So I don't play.
Yeah.
I don't play. And it's much, much better that way. And I'm not perfect, but I try the best I can. And it helps tremendously, because also if I'm not dealing with 6 drinks the next morning, chances are I'm getting up and working out, as opposed to waking up 6 drinks later, not hungover, but certainly not wide awake enough to go for a workout. So it's all about figuring out, knowing yourself and to thine own self being true.
I hear you. And I like just eliminating the challenge for those things to come into play. I really am trying to eliminate a lot of that, because the time that I spend in deep work is much more lucrative, obviously, and beneficial for myself and for my investors. And so, not allowing those text messages to come in. I mean, one thing that I do every night is my phone is on Do Not Disturb from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m.
Yeah, same thing.
And just that alone is really beneficial, because I usually start working at 7:30. I don't get up quite as early as you, but I work from 7:30 to 10 without answering emails or phone calls. And just that can help a lot of people's businesses. Again, something I've talked about a lot, but just a little takeaway there. So I want to talk to you about, using technology to overcome some of these challenges as well. So other than the Ohm writing app you mentioned earlier, are there any apps that you like, or any other technological softwares that you enjoy that can really help people focus and be more productive?
When you're ADHD, you're very much about the numbers. And so to use the numbers, so for me, it's about making sure that I am focused on how many calories did I burn today? How much was I active? Did I stand up? Did I work out? Heart rate? I'm constantly trying to lower my blood pressure. I'm constantly trying to do the right things like that. So data is amazing, because men lie, women lie, children lie. 2 things that don't lie: yoga pants and data. So if I look at those numbers and I see my heart rate is this versus what it was 2 weeks ago and it's lower, that's a standard. I know that. And so I'm able to understand that and see that and go from there. So again, it's all about knowing yourself and doing the right thing for yourself.
Have you taken any personality tests?
No, I have a pretty good idea that I'm already fucked up, and I'm fine with that.
It's interesting. I will say that I'm a big proponent of it. I had a couple recommended to me, and man, it is interesting, because I definitely kind of person that has contemplated frequently about who I am as a person. And taking one of these tests, there was something that was actually revealed to me, which I know is 100% true, that I never thought about it. And it's been on my mind ever since. So if you get anything from, we've gotten a lot from this conversation, but if you get anything from this conversation, I feel like It's a great risk reward. 20 minutes, $45, whatever, the Colby Index, the Myers-Briggs, whatever, any of them. Awesome. So, okay. So we talked about deep work a little bit. Let's dive into that. How do you schedule your deep work? Is it all done in the morning? Do you do it on certain days?
My deep work is writing, and it's all done on airplanes.
Okay, got it. And so you do a lot of flying, obviously, because you do a lot of writing.
Work. And sometimes when I find myself on deadline for a book, I will get on the plane just for the sake of it. I flew to Tokyo and back to write Zombie Loyalists with no other reason for being on a plane than to write Zombie Loyalists.
Wow, that is a long flight.
14 hours in business class one way, or 15 hours in business class one way, 14 hours the other way. 5 chapters out, 5 chapters back, landed 31 hours later. I smelled, but I had a book.
That's awesome. And kind of amazing because Tokyo is incredible. So you didn't spend any time there. You just wanted to bang it out.
2 hours in the lounge.
Okay. That's awesome.
Got off the plane. I went through immigration, took a breath of fresh air, came back to immigration, went back to the lounge, took a coffee, had a shower, came back on the exact same plane, same seat, 2 hours later. And wrote the next 5 chapters.
Interesting. So there's a couple of tricks in that are implicit, but not explicitly outlined. So number one, obviously the deep work component is amazing. Number two, you had booked the flight, so the time is absolutely blocked. Number three, the notifications are completely turned off. Most likely you didn't have any Wi-Fi or anything like that. But also the deadline, you're creating a deadline there because you have to get on the plane. You also have to get on the second plane. And also you have to have it done by the time you land. So all of that is just working towards you. And I really like that. I haven't done anything I actually don't work very well on airplanes, but it's an interesting strategy. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And then you have to, you also have to expect immigration while they're detaining you for 3 hours while you're out.
That's a good point. Right, because that's if you go in and out of Mexico like that, for example, they will detain you for much longer, I believe, than going to Tokyo. But fair enough. So I know that you're a parent, and I wanted to get a perspective on this in terms of how ADHD impacts that, and also you seem to be very obsessed with productivity. And so I'm interested to see how you balance that productivity with being a parent, as I know it's something you take both of those very seriously.
Remember the part where I said I get up at 4 a.m. or earlier? Mm-hmm. That's when I'm the most productive. My daughter wakes up at 7. Between 4 and 7, I've done an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours on the bike. I've showered, I've changed, I've read the news, I've checked my email for the first time all day, I've answered stuff. By the time she's up, I'm back to focusing on her until the nanny takes her to school. And then from there, I am back to in my zone. And then school's over. I'm home by 4:30, 5 o'clock, see her again. I don't, when I'm with her, it's not about work.
Right. Well, again, with the productivity thing, I mean, look, if you're doing 3 things at once, you're doing nothing. That includes being a parent. So totally makes sense.
I'm not saying I don't. I focus on one thing at a time. I don't say, I do this and that. No, you're not doing any of them well. So
right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I am also very obsessed with productivity, and that's one of the reasons that I work remote. I work at home office, and my whole team works remote. I don't like traveling in Los Angeles, for example, is something I don't do very often. I don't drive very often. A lot of people get a lot out of in-person meetings. I strongly prefer the phone because of the productivity component and the efficiency. What are your thoughts on in-person meetings? Do you do, quote, a meeting day, or do you have...
Yeah, 1 day a week. Every Monday is meeting day. It will be a total of 15 minutes. We will probably walk around and take the meeting. And if you are late, that caves into your time. If you're 9 minutes late to a 15-minute meeting, you have 6 minutes to talk to me. I'm not going to sit there and ruin my whole schedule because you can't get your shit together.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to hear that because I actually do like doing meeting days. I don't do them very frequently, but when I do them, that's the entire day is just dedicated to the meeting. Usually we'll pick one particular location and just have all the meetings there. It sounds like we're kind of similar in that regard. So that's good to know. Okay, cool. So we've kind of covered all the basic stuff. And this is actually really important because, like I said, the listeners are always scratching and clawing for an additional 10 or 15 minutes. First of all, what's your preferred way to get information? Is it reading it, watching it, hearing it, doing it? What's the way that you learn
reading
best?
It because I can read at my speed, which is super fast. Video podcasts all tend to be too slow for me.
Okay.
And I did listen to a few podcasts, but I usually listen to them when I'm like running or whatever in the park or exercising. So I prefer stuff that way. And then I also prefer to be email and text. Don't call me ever.
Yeah, I like that too. Email in particular, just because of the productivity. I don't really like the notifications. You mentioned you read. What are some of the books that have really impacted you that you've gotten a lot out of?
Oh man. So, it's funny. I have my go-to series of like 4 or 5 books that I reread over and over again. I'll tell you about those. One's called They Can Kill You, But They Can't Eat You. It's by a woman named Dawn Steele, who was the first female president of Paramount Pictures. And it's all about how she survived going up the ranks as a woman and as an outsider in Hollywood. It's a phenomenal book. I read The Art of War all the time. I'm currently reading for the first time Harry Potter because I never read Harry Potter before, and my daughter's just starting. Every night we read a little Harry Potter together, which is just awesome. I never realized how great the books are. I've never seen the movies either, so I'm really enjoying this like sort of first time down the road.
Right.
What else do I read? Great book called totally spacing on the name now. I can see it in my head. I don't remember the name of it. Deep Work by Cal Norris is phenomenal. That's all about the concept of going in and exactly what he mentions me. He mentions me in the airplane for flying.
Oh, that's
and
right. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I knew I had heard that before. That's incredible. It's a great book, by the way. Anyone should check it out.
So anything I think, I get, the problem is I get books in the mail every week for people that hope I'll put it on my blog or talk about it or whatever. And I have much of a backlog of like 30 books. At some point I'm going to lock myself on an island for a week and just read books.
Sounds like a great vacation. Not only have you had a lot of influential people in your show, and know that you've gotten a lot out of those conversations as well, just because the podcast medium is an incredible way to talk to people that are influential. You mentioned Tony Robbins, for example. What are some of the most impactful takeaways that you've gotten from interviewing people on your podcast? Some of the reoccurring themes.
Seth Godin's definitely a theme of if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards. That's number one, no question about it. I think we had a former Navy SEAL on the podcast named Jack Walson. His thing was, in the Navy SEALs, they say the only easy day was yesterday. And the basic premise is you need to understand that things are going to be hard. Life's not supposed to be that easy, right? So you can either step up and get it done or slink in the background and let someone else get it done. But, both have repercussions, right? You either do your best or you don't do your best, and there's a price to pay for both.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I won't pester you for one more, but that's definitely a really good takeaway. I like the second one a lot, especially just because of the demand for excellence that's implicitly there. But look, you can do whatever you want, but the reality is the consequences are going to be there no matter what. So, all right. Well, obviously we covered a ton of topic unquestionably in a very short amount of time. No one is surprised that knows anything about you. Before we close up though, I wanted to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that you think would be interesting? We'll obviously give you an opportunity to share how people can learn more about you and your company, but any high level things that you think we should have breezed over at the 1.9x speed of Peter Shankman?
I would just suggest understanding that in the next 10 years, 35% of the workforce, both sales and customers, are going to be neuroatypical. So ADD, ADHD, autism, spectrum, whatever. So if you're part of that, great. If you're not, figure out how to sell to those people and how to hire those people, because they're going to be a huge part of the workforce.
Interesting. Why is that regarding there's the change that's taking place, or what's going on?
Well, a lot of people are getting diagnosed for the first time. A lot of older people, kids are getting diagnosed. They're entering the workforce. The first generation of kids that ever got diagnosed with ADHD are entering the workforce now. But secondly, you have a lot of parents who are entering the workforce, or a lot of parents in the workforce who have taken their kids to get diagnosed and then say, well, shit, that sounds like what I have. I should check this out. And all of a sudden, so it's not that it's massively growing and everyone in the world is getting ADHD. It's just more people are understanding what it is and how it relates.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, definitely a good takeaway there. All right. So before we close up there, just let the listeners know how they can learn more about your company, your website, books you've written, et cetera.
Yeah. So my entire life is at shankman.com. I have a mastermind group, about 150 entrepreneurs. We stick together for support and accountability, and that's at shankminds.com. And the podcast is fasterthannormal.com.
Awesome. Well, Peter, we will link to all of those in the show notes page. Again, I really appreciate you coming on, added a lot of value, and look forward to doing it again in a few months.
My pleasure. Happy to do it.
All right, listeners, thanks for checking out the episode. As always, the contact information for our guest will be available in the show notes page, which is hosted on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. Don't forget, if you want access to some of the free goodies that I'm talking about at the beginning of these episodes, like free ebooks, weekly investor emails, and articles about some of the most important investment-related topics, make sure that you have created an account with CFC, because this stuff is automatically available. You can do this by going to cashflowconnections.com and signing up as an accredited investor. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at hunterthompson@cashflowconnections.com. Thanks again.